Welcome everybody back to the Milligenics podcast here. We've got a very special episode today. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. One of my favorite topics. Um, it's going to be focusing on finance, and we have Victor here. He is a Bronx native. Hey, Victor. And of course, as always, we've got Master
Sensei
Sensei.
here.
And Victor is a Bronx native. He came to the United States when he was only 6 years old from the Dominican Republic. So I kind of can relate to that because I came here when I was around 5 or 6 from Puerto Rico. He attended Catholic school and received a business degree from the College of Mount St. Vincent. He has worked as a recruiter on Wall Street, and he learned from that trade in order to bring those dividends back to his community. No pun intended there with the stock market. So others can benefit and learn things like the job process. Victor has purchased a house in the Poconos with other co-investors, and he has used that as an Airbnb, which he has sold for a profit. And so I want to welcome you, Victor, to our show. Thank you for coming here and bringing your knowledge and your expertise, as well as your journey through navigating all these different avenues from Wall Street into our street, so to speak. So I want to thank you, man, for being on the show.
Thanks, and I'm glad to be here. Right, thanks for giving me space and time, to actually join the podcast. Yeah, but I'm just glad to, come into the podcast. I know that one of my coworkers basically told me, hey, look, come in, join, talk a little bit more about your experiences regarding your financial background, and I'm here to bring in insight and hopefully talk about a bit more in detail, right, as to the things that I have learned throughout my own personal journey regarding personal financing, knowing how to invest, where to put your money in correctly, and play the long game, not just the short time, vision of things,
Right.
but the long, sustainable growth in building wealth.
Really excited to have Victor here with us. I've had the pleasure of having some casual conversations along the way, and I know that he's a very well knowledgeable young man with a wealth of expertise in a short amount of time and in this short life. I mean, he's only his mid to high 20s. So in the short amount of time, he's accumulated quite of life experience. I've seen him do some wonderful things. So I look forward to hearing a little bit more about his journey and maybe pick up some tips along the way that I myself wouldn't mind implementing into my financial health. So welcome, Victor. We look forward to today's show and maybe even having you back at another time to continue to share your expertise.
Definitely, thank you, Sensei. Appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of my own personal background, um, essentially, when I graduated from college, I went through the process of, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, get your degree, and you should be fine, right? As we all know, that's not the truth anymore, right? Maybe back in the 90s and the 80s, but things have changed and it's already 2021, right? We're already past about 40 years plus regarding that. And I had a rude awakening. I still had the entrepreneurship spirit, right? I still got into investments. I still got with a few friends of mine from college and actually bought a house in the Poconos and put in Airbnb in order to generate revenue, right? I was lucky. I did had great partners, and it wasn't perfect, right? I learned a lot from that experience, especially when it comes to the maintenance and operations side of a business, and how crucial that is in order to actually understand how it could succeed, right?
And
Um,
Victor, I wanna stop you there for a second because I think a lot of people, for someone as young as you, to
yeah.
get to the point where they were able to get a place in the Poconos, how did you make that happen? How did you get the capital you needed to be able to do that? I know you had some help with some co-investors, but what gave you the idea? Like, I want to do this, and how were you able to do that?
Well, interesting enough, it's you have to find the right person, right? Back in college, I had a great friend, right? His name is Joe. We kind of competed with each other during business classes. As to who got the highest grade. When I get an A minus, I got an A, right? So needless to say, he won most of the times because his brain is more analytical and more into the numbers, right? So we always were planning in terms of actually how to get into business and how to basically um, build wealth because we both came from a very from a background in which we didn't have much growing up, right? So during that time, when I graduated, we kept in communication regarding getting into real estate, more specifically regarding how to build wealth in real estate, but we didn't have much, right? And this guy's brain always functions, right? So we communicated with one of my former colleagues, and we tried to get into real estate because he had more of capital than we did, but that didn't work out unfortunately. And one time when he was on vacation in the Poconos, right, he opened his phone, he looked at the real estate market over there, and he saw houses for 60,000, 40,000, 35,000, 45,000, 50,000. And he wondered, wait, is this the price of a house of a single family, two plus bedroom, right, house in this area where people from New York and New Jersey go here occasionally, especially during the summer or winters, right, to get away from the city? What's going on over here, right? So he reached out to me and he reached out to a few other friends of ours, and he basically said, "Get ready because this is going to be this is feasible, right?" So one of the most important aspects is to make sure that you find somebody who's as ambitious as you, or even more ambitious than you, that always keeps their mind running towards the goals, right? The people that you surround yourself with is critical in terms of making sure that you are successful, right? And once you figure out the industry, which for me began with real estate, right? He was able to find, a market in the Poconos that we can actually go in because one of the issues regarding real estate is that it's a very difficult market to get into because you need capital, you need cash, right? You always need a down payment, right? And with a down payment, you have to double the down payment because you got to worry about closing costs, right? So it's not easy to get in if you don't have the money saved, right? So we looked at the houses there, and we had about four investors, right, including myself and him. So we were able to divide the cost by four, right? So
Is
instead of
is was that just the down payment cost plus the closing cost?
everything,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So because we have four, basically what we did is that we agreed to have a partnership agreement, right? And we legally signed the partnership agreement on a piece of paper because we got to make sure you're covered, right?
Wow.
Which they divided the equity into 25% for four people, right? That means that all expenses and all ownership goes into 25% each, right? So if the down payment is $1,000, it's 10 G's, right? I mean, the down payment, the closing cost is 10 G's, 10 grand. That's divided by four, right? So everybody's paying about 2,200 or 2,300, which is making it a little bit more feasible to actually purchase the property,
Hmm.
right? So one thing that we did because we didn't have enough is that we diversified um, our costs by getting more people involved that we can trust, right?
Hmm.
And then solidifying that into a paper, which is basically a contract, making sure that everybody understood, hey, look, the cost is divided equally with all of us, while at the same time, once we get revenue, everybody's getting the same amount of money, right? So that allows us to actually get the cash that we needed in order to actually start looking for the houses, right? And we went there about it was crazy because I did not have my driver's license. I'm still working on it, but we had two actually all three of my colleagues did. So we went over there every single week and looked at different houses. Had different realtors that were helping us out. Um, and right before we found the house that we wanted, there was a previous house that was like a mansion, right? Everybody has seen Home Alone, right?
Hmm.
That house. That I kid you not, we went there. It was at the and corner, so there was like barely any neighbors around. It was perfect because once you enter it, it had a massive fireplace with a expansive living room. It had um, three to four bedrooms, right, and three bathrooms. And if you went to the basement, they were. I mean, you can see that they had a project going on. There was like a bar, an unfinished bar that was being created. There was an unfinished bathroom. There was space like it was a space like you actually go to an actual bar, right? And we were thinking like, what? We were asking questions to the realtor. Who owned this house? What happened? Oh, this is a foreclosure. What were they trying to do here? This is like an underground club. And it had a two-part garage all connected to the house. And when we looked, they had like lights everywhere. So I'm like, this is going to be a party house, right? Which is perfect for Airbnb, right? We look at the price, $85,000.
Hmm.
85,000 for that in one house, right? We were like, oh my god, this is perfect, but it's a little bit of this
Over
is
your budget.
a little bit about our budget, but we were considering how we can come up with the money, maybe
Right.
get an additional partner, and then we looked at the back end, right? The backyard, there was a big pump, and we wondered what's that pump, and it's where the septic was at,
Hmm.
right? So the realtors have to let us know, right?
Underground.
Yeah, underground. So basically there's something wrong with the septic. So apparently the whole septic was messed up. So in order to fix the septic, that would have cost about $25,000.
That's what I was about to say. That
Yeah.
sounded about right.
So it was we knew for a fact this house was significantly undervalued, but we didn't have the cash to do so, right? Funny story. Later on, one of my Joe, the analytical guy, right, later told me about a few years later that same house, basically the bank eventually fixed the septic because
Hmm.
the bank owned it because of the foreclosure. They fixed the septic, and then the house was sold for about $150,000,
Okay.
right? And then so what the person that bought the house basically remodeled it, rehab the house,
Hmm.
and then sold it for $250,000, right? All in
Hmm.
the span of just about 2 years. So for a fact the house was undervalued, which it didn't have the capital. But so you will come across opportunities that you think to yourself, oh, only if I had the money, I know this house is undervalued, I could probably fix it, but you cannot eat more than you can chew, right?
Hmm.
So just a few houses after that, we came across this amazing house that had that family feeling, right? Small but spacious house. Had a front yard, side yard, backyard. Was a three bedroom, two bathroom, single family house, 1,700 square feet, right? Um, and it was a beautiful house, right? It was built in the year 2000. It was relatively new, so we figured this is an amazing house for us to actually buy, right? Um, it was about the asking price was about $85,000.
Hmm.
We had people come in, we did the inspection, um, look at the reports, and we came up with the conclusion that because there's some fixes, we negotiated the price down to 82,500, right? And we put that house in Airbnb. Now, one thing that the way we work this, like Joe will handle the clients and the finance. I will handle more just making sure the operations in terms of the house are done, right? So I was in contact with the cleaning people. I was in contact with this, and that. But the situation that we learn is that when you start a business like that, there's a lot of unexpected expenses, right?
Hmm.
Especially when you are in real estate and you do not live in the area, right? If you live in New York, that's an hour 30 minutes, right? And you are not relatively available to drive there because you have a job too.
You have to factor
Yeah,
that in.
yes, but you also got to depend on other people, and they're gonna charge you a higher rate. And you also got to consider that yes, it's just a different state, but their certain expectations are definitely met. Right in New York, where something happens, you can expect somebody to be there within 24 hours or less. In other states, where something happens, you need time, right? So, in terms of making sure that that things are done accordingly, setting a standard with the cleaners, making sure things are done ASAP. If a guest, for example, lost a key, which happened, and then we have another booking happen in 3 hours, we had to get another one of our cleaners to come in, try to fix the locks, all that. They're eating your garbage happened, right? Creates a situation that the expenses do go up, but that house didn't made us a good amount of money. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in yearly revenue, um, which is
How long did you have it for? If
we
you
had
don't
it
know.
for about just a little bit less than 2 years, a little bit less than 2 years, which
Hmm.
means that we have to pay the taxes, right? Fun fact: if you hold a house for just 2 years, you don't have to pay taxes afterwards, right? But we held it for about a little bit less than 2 years, about a year and 8 months, maybe like 10 months, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but we decided to sell. Uh,
What made you want to sell?
well, when I was speaking to Joe, because Joe was the one who was like, we have to sell this house, right? There's a lot of factors that were piling up, right? Um, that made it, I mean, the most feasible decision here was to sell because with all the unexpected expenses, right? All the worries that we had to do, well, have to do our job, right? And I'm not perfect, right? There was also some turbulence in terms of the partnerships, right? I have my faults, other people have the faults too, but this is how you learn because we were young. Right? We did our best that we did with basically with a college degree that only taught us books, and once you actually go out there, you're kind of like, okay, this is the real world now, right? So what made us sell is that we would kind of figure out, hey, this project was good. We learned a lot. Okay, let's try to see if we can make some money and call it a day, right? So we put it in the market for $125,000. We called the same realtor. Repeated business. That relationship is important when you're trying to build, because one thing about business, sometimes it's not about the money. Sometimes it's about the relationships you build, right? So she put it in the market for $125,000, which in a month and a half, we had two potential offers, right? We had a cash offer that unfortunately fell through, and we had another offer from somebody from New York, right? He lived in Harlem, worked in the Bronx, Dominican too, right? Had a son, had a family and everything, and he decided to buy a house in the Poconos, right? Former military man, so he had the military loan. So we were like, this is perfect. He asked for a little bit of discount. We gave him the discount. After all things considered, he bought the house for $117,000, right? Or in a year and a half, right? Give or take. Um, so we bought it for 83,500, right? We sold it for all things considered $117,000, right? We were all happy. We made a little bit of profit. We divided, we did our thing. Um, but that experience taught us a lot. I'm not gonna lie. It's one of the things that made me understand that when you own a home, one aspect that you have to strongly consider is not just it is the operations, the maintenance, which is the highest expense when you have an asset to maintain it, right? And also the numbers. You got to look at the numbers and the facts, right? If you know for a fact you're overreaching yourself and now you lose money, right? Make a rational decision, not an emotional decision, right? So I've learned a lot from that experience. Um, but even throughout that whole time, I was still working for an IT recruitment firm in Wall Street, right? Um, where I am closing my own deals, trying to figure out how to, fill all those opportunities and all those jobs. Um, and even during that time, right, I've learned a lot in terms of how the job application process works because that was my bread and butter. I had to get this thing done in order for me to maintain a job, right? And recruitment itself, right? So there was a moment there that I kind of understood. I made a joke with one of my colleagues. There was like two, three Dominicans in the whole company. Uh,
So Victor, real quick. So
Mhm.
this happened after you sold the property
No,
that you
this
were
happened
working?
all together.
Oh wow.
We
Okay.
were doing
Okay.
both at the same time, right? So we all had our own individual careers, right? And we
Okay.
were working in the city while maintaining the property,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
So this is another aspect, right? We couldn't all, be fully dedicated to the project. And of course, some people who put more work than, oh, shout out to Joe for doing that. But all the aspects, right? So this all happened at the same time, right? Weekends, how's everything Boconos? Weekdays, work, right? Trying to close those deals, right? So it was a grind. It was a grind. But the one joke I made with Ralph was that everybody after they graduate college should be a recruiter. And he looked at me because we were there at night, about 7 p.m. on a Friday night, trying to close deals. And he looked at me and said, "Why would somebody want to do this?" And I told him because I could finally find out how to get a job. He laughed, right? Because it's true. We learned so much about how the process is that we learn how to do things in the 21st century, right? And how to use networking to leverage various interviews. So that's what I began thinking. Maybe I should bring that back to the community, right? So as time progressed, I,
So let me ask you this, Victor. So with that, what we just said right now, so now you're looking back and you're looking at all the things that some of the things that you did right, as well as some of the things that you could have improved. If now you as your older self, right, going back into time to, like, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, perhaps, when this thing started happening, what would you tell yourself, 5 years ago, to make this experience, to have improved this experience for yourself?
the question is, and this is where we all go off separate parts, is how we trying to get into real estate, right? Because you need to look at your end objective, right? Some want to experiment with Airbnb a little bit more, which is true.
Hmm.
There's more profit to do with Airbnb. For me, Airbnb is not that attractive anymore because of the headaches that had to deal with. And for me, I just want to make sure that I can put my money in a place in real estate, right? That eventually grows with minimal to no maintenance from my end, right? Um, from others, they do maybe they'll have the time to go with with Airbnb and so on, but eventually we all agree that we do want to own various different properties. Right now we want, right? And we do want to hold on those properties long term so that we can actually um, have the assets and the value of those assets grow over time, right? Because that's how you build wealth, right? And have somebody occupy those assets, whether it's Airbnb or a renter, right? Um, but the most important aspect that we learn is that, as you go through it, there are other tools that we were not fully, well, at least for me, we didn't fully understand in terms of how to manage properties, right? That now we understood because we went through it, right? Well, definitely hold on to that property more than 2 years, right?
Okay, all right. So there you
Exactly.
go. So that's one,
Exactly.
because you had to
Right?
pay taxes for letting it go before the 2 years.
Yes. Definitely understanding, the 2 years aspect. Um, always do research on the law, on which state and city and county you're trying to conduct business in, right? It's different. For instance, in New York, if they say that I have a renter, right, and that renter only pays the first month of rent, then I have to go through a whole year and a half of process kicking that person out. And through the whole year and a half process, they're not paying any rent. So that means I have to take the L for a whole year and a half, right? You got to consider if rent in New York City, which we all know how expensive that is, right? Let's say it's $2,000 for this renter, right? For that time, right? For that time, they would have to well, definitely hold on to that property more than 2 years, right?
Okay, all right. So there you
Exactly.
go. So that's one,
Exactly.
because you had to
Right?
pay taxes for letting it go before the 2 years.
Yes. Definitely understanding, the 2 years aspect. Um, Always do research on the law, on which state and city and county you're trying to conduct business in, right? It's different. For instance, in New York, if they say that I have a renter, right, and that renter only pays the first month of rent, then I have to go through a whole year and a half of process kicking that person out. And through the whole year and a half process, they're not paying any rent. So that means I have to take the L for a whole year and a half, right? You got to consider if rent in New York City, which we all know how expensive that is, right? Let's say it's $2,000 for this renter, right? For that time, right? For that time, they would have to well, definitely hold on to that property more than 2 years, right?
Okay, all right.
The
So there you
taxes,
go. So
the
that's one
taxes,
because you had to
right?
pay taxes for letting it go before the 2 years.
Yes. Definitely understanding, the 2 years aspect. Um, Always do research on the law, on which state and city and county you're trying to conduct business in, right? It's different. For instance, in New York, if they say that I have a renter, right, and that renter only pays the first month of rent, then I have to go through a whole year and a half of process kicking that person out. And through the whole year and a half process, they're not paying any rent. So that means I have to take the L for a whole year and a half, right? You got to consider if rent in New York City, which we all know how expensive that is, right? Let's say it's $2,000 for this renter, right? For that time, right? For that time, they would have to for that time they will basically have to live there without without paying anything, and that's about 20,000, right? Not including legal fees, not including any additional legal expenses that I will have to cover to go to court, and um, so it does add up, right? The situation that I look for regarding the things that I've learned and things that I would tell myself is like, hey, look, first hold to that property for about 2 years, right? Second, do a little bit more research in terms of the county and the laws in that county and the state, right, to make sure that you are in the right type of business that you have some flexibility, right? Third, look at the financial tools that are available at your disposal from the banks, right? Refinancing, if that property value does go up, right? Um, Understanding how the interest rate does affect and how your credit score does affect. Honestly, that's one thing that I've learned, and it's something that I'm working on now, right? Working on my credit score to make sure I can actually get the best interest rate possible. So when I buy my property, right, hopefully at the end of the year, I have the best interest, which lowers down my overall monthly payment, right? So something happens, at least I have that wiggle room, right? Everybody rather pay about 1,000, maybe $900 a month for paying for insurance, taxes, etc., as opposed to like $1,200, $1,300 a month. That makes a big difference, right? Um, but yeah, those are the aspects I would tell myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. That sounds great.
You're welcome, Sensei.
That's great, Vic. So basically, the lessons there that you learned was, I guess, in a way, was one of them as well was like getting the right property management company, right? Because like the
Mhm.
distance that you had to sort of travel to, if something had to come up where you had to go there, was not really convenient. Um, so I think that was that's an important lesson because that's one of the things too that I'm going through right now because I'm actually sitting in my rental property right now is for people that are not very savvy when it comes to making repairs and doing maintenance and things like that. It might come in handy to maybe have a property management company.
Mhm.
For the most part, for right now, I'm just gonna kind of do it myself because I'm pretty handy and I'm gonna be using an agent to try to rent out the place. But I think the ideas that you had were really great. So going forward, you said you want to get another property. Do you have an idea what you want to do with that? Like, what's your next strategy when it comes to that?
Well, honestly, I've been thinking very deeply about this because now that I'm saving money, I kind of understand how long it takes to actually save that money, right? So the value and of the income that I put in, right, of my capital, um, is more concerning to me because now I'm kind of a little bit older. I'm not actually starting, right? And I do have long-term goals that I want to accomplish, and for that, of course, income and money is also tied to that. So I've been, I've been considering different routes. One definite aspect, whether that's a co-op or a condo or a single family or a property, whatever kind of property that I buy, I want to make sure that after those 2 years are up, I'm able to rent that property, right? That I'm not tied down to a contract that says, hey, this has to be your primary home and you got to live there for the rest of your life, right? I want to have the flexibility to make sure that that property, after I finish renting, living in there for about 2 years and fixing it up, right? So doing those little repairments that I want to learn as well, right? By living in the house and actually looking at YouTube videos and asking questions to friends that have done so and so on and so forth, and always increasing the property value of that house, right? That once I learn those aspects, I can increase the value by refinancing it, get the money that I get from refinancing, right? Because basically, when you refinance a property and say you tell the bank, hey, look, come over here, look at the house. It's better than it was before, like a couple years back. Reevaluate the property of the house, right? And let's say that I bought the house for like $400,000, and now the bank comes in and says this house is worth $500,000. That the gap between $400,000 to $500,000 is the 100 grand, right?
Right.
So basically, what the bank says is like, look, let's let's increase the loan that we gave you, and here's the $100,000, right? And now you have a check of $100,000 cash, right? You can use that money to buy another property, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can use that money to reinvest. I mean, technically, you can use the money for whatever you want, right? But at the end of the day, right, the goal is to build asset, to build wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that money, I can be like, okay, let me go to my second property, let me buy my second property, let me move over there and learn how to fix that house, right? So once I move, I want to make sure that that property that I just fixed, that I spent 2 years on, is able to that I am able to keep it and have somebody else rent it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the renter can pay for all the expenses for that house, but I still own it, and as the property value keeps increasing over time, that's my asset. My
Mm-hmm.
money increases over time because that's how you build wealth. Um, but the one definite aspect is that I want to make sure I'm able to rent that property after I'm done with it, right? I'm playing the long game here, not the short-term game anymore. Um, I kind of realized that if the more you do it, the more you go about it, the long-term game, right? Not just the 5 year plan, but a 10, 15, 20, 30 year plan, the more flexibility you have to make sure you accomplish those goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and one thing that I also want to add to the story is that, after I moved to, working in the nonprofit sector, being a career coach, teaching what I've learned during my time as an IT recruiter in Wall Street, and teaching how the process goes to making sure those people in our community are able to land those opportunities as an entry level IT, right? Um, I had to go to my own personal finance journey, right? I was still young, right? I was spending money like crazy. I was using my credit cards, right? I might be in business, but by all means was that I was not good with money, right? One thing that you will learn is that, especially young people that are in business and have their own kind of financial, or I mean, entrepreneurship experience, they might not be great with money, right? Money comes in, money comes out, right? Um, and once this, unfortunately, with the pandemic happened, right? Um, One of my friends, who was one of the people who was one of my partners, right, during the Poconos house, he told me, he sat down with me, and was like, look, let's look at your budget, right? This guy made me, not made me, but basically told me, hey, you gotta look at your financial statements, look at your bank statements, you look at your credit card statements, write it down in an Excel sheet, right? Write it down when it's due, write the minimum that you gotta pay, right? Put the numbers in,
So
right?
important. Yeah.
Very important, right? And literally made me write the numbers on an Excel sheet and looked at it, asked me a ton of questions, and rearranged it because he's an accountant. Rearranged it in a way that with all the formulas that made me see concretely exactly what the numbers were telling me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was scary. I'm not gonna lie. It's a scary process because when you live your life, free, and you think you're fine with money because you have money coming in, you got money coming out. But once you sit down and you take the time and not just think, but actually look at the pieces of paper the bank is sending you, and you put it into numbers in an Excel sheet, it's scary what it tells you, right? Um,
I'm scared of Sensei's food budget sometimes. He has like these grand, meals. When he used to eat steak, I'm like, dude,
Things are expensive nowadays.
it adds up. It adds
Yeah.
up.
No, absolutely. This is why I'm cooking from home now too, because that's exactly the part of the reason. I love to eat, and eating out was coming out as over $100 a week easy. And it's crazy that one person can eat over $100 worth of food in one week, when you can feed a family with it sometimes. So
Mhm.
so this is why I also decided part of my budget is to cook for myself, to sort of and another thing is cooking healthy, so that I can
Hmm.
avoid future health costs.
Right.
So I try to invest by trying to buy a little bit of a healthier food choice, just because I'm also getting older, and I got to think about this vessel to make sure it carries me over for the next 20 or 30 years, because I want to be around for a while, a little bit longer.
Yeah, and I think that's why like health comes before wealth, and there's no coincidence in that in the alphabet.
Mhm.
Right.
Because you can have all the wealth in the world, but if you don't have your health, you're pretty much done for.
Yeah, yeah,
I agree.
absolutely. And Victor, man, the amount of information that you have shared in such a short period of time, has been very wealthy. Now, I'm curious though, because I've heard you talk about some stocks and some investments that you all also like to dabble with. How did you get started with that? And if you don't mind me asking, I know it's getting out of the subject from your real estate venture, but I want to make sure that we try to touch both points, before the show is over. How did you come across that, and how is that working out for you?
Well, I actually got very into stocks last year, when the pandemic hit. Um, but one thing that it just connect everything in terms of health and building wealth, whether that would be the stock market budgeting or the stock market, is that it requires a certain level of discipline, right? And by that I mean that you have to make a plan and stick to it. Whatever you do, you got to make a plan and stick to it, right? Um, the way I came about that, right, is once I had the budget and I stick to the budget, and it was difficult because I had to cut down. I love to eat too, right? I mean, come on, look at me, right? I love to eat too. I love to eat out. And before the pandemic, I was going out with my friends drinking, and uh, bar tab, $100, $120, right? And I was like, whoa, that's actually pretty. I mean, now looking at it, that's basically half my food budget for the whole month, right? Um, so I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, let me save up. And the more disciplined I became in terms of saving up and how my savings account was looking more healthier and healthier and healthier,
Mm.
I thought to myself, okay, the stock market is looking like it's recovering because I have this surplus of cash. I can now invest that money into assets that I feel would appreciate it. In other words, go up over time, right? In other words, building my wealth. So budgeting, first and foremost, is the tool that allow me to save that money so I can actually go into this opportunity in the stock market, right? So honestly, what I did was that I looked at the news. I looked at the news. I looked at my New York Times daily briefings. I tried to connect the dots by looking at what companies were doing, and then using my knowledge of business that I learned in class, right? Supply and demand, microeconomics, and so on, to figure out if this is a good company to invest in and if it's going to go up. Because have you guys seen during March that plummeted, right? And
Yeah.
everything's recovered, right? But during that time of recovery, nobody knew what was going to happen. Um, so what I did is that I looked at different companies. For instance, Moderna came in the news. Oh, Moderna is experimenting with a vaccine, right? That news came back in April of last year, right? So I put up some money in Moderna, right? At one time, I had 33 stocks in Moderna, and my overall price cost was about $32, right?
For sure.
Per share during that
Hmm.
time, right? That was early on last year. I invested money in Neighbors Industries. That was they. I bought it for 50 cents, but then they had a 1 to 50 um, not a split, but basically they recover for every single 50 stocks that you have now. You only have one, right? And that raised the price to about like $9 and some change. Eventually got pushed up to 10 and some change, right? So I had a good number of stocks regarding Naval Industries at $10. I had invested in different companies, and I was like, okay, I put about $2,000, well, $2,100 in total into the stock market, right? See what happens. July came in, grew exponentially. I was like, this is great. I have 40% returns. That means that for every dollar I put in, I got $1.40 back. And that was only a matter of 3 months, which is amazing. Never heard of, right? And you know what happened? June, July dropped. Poof. Because everything was still shut down, right?
Hmm.
And we reopened and then we had to shut down again, right? Um, and during that time, basically what I was going through is that I thought about making long-term decisions, but I was too emotionally invested, right?
Hmm.
And the one thing that you have to understand as an investor, and everybody makes this mistake when they first start, is that when you invest, your decision has to be rational and
Hmm.
it has to be a process, right? You cannot alleviate from that. You cannot make an emotional decision because you feel like, oh, I'm in red, I'm losing all my money, let me take whatever out and walk away with my losses. No, you got to stick your gun, right? If you invest in this company, you got to make sure that you wait it out until it goes back to green, right? Until you can actually sell it off at a higher price than you actually paid for it, right? Except if that company is going bankrupt. That's the only assumption. I held. And then the election was coming due. First week of November. I was worried. I didn't know what was going to happen, right? If Trump won, I knew there was going to be riots. If Biden won, I know Trump wasn't going down without a fight. So I pulled out. I took all my money that I had in the stock market. It was in the negatives, and I took it out. One of the worst mistakes I made in 2020. You know why? 2 weeks after, those same stocks that I bought, neighbors that I bought for that I literally owned for about like $10 and some change per share, exploded to about $75 a share. That's
Mm.
5 times the value of every dollar I put in there, right? Times that percentage times, right? Moderna, that went all the way to $170 per share from the $33, $31 that I bought it in, right? Between that range, right? Because I bought it in different times. Um, Other investments that I made that I portfolio that I pulled out at a loss exploded into. Looking back, I would probably made about $10,000 if I kept it in just for until like December time. $2,000 in, I could have had 10 G's, but I decided to pull out, right? And that's one thing that I learned in the stock market. Don't make emotional decisions based on what you feel might happen. Look at the company value, look at what they're doing, and stick to your guns, right? Um, and that's one thing that I regretted. And I was done with the stock market because after that I was kind of upset. Uh, Recently being for about a couple of weeks. Um, Again, a great friend of mine, Joe, the same guy that's been doing my budget, etc., was like, Victor, you got to get back in the stock market, man. But this time, educate yourself a little bit more. I'm like, what do you mean? Educate yourself on options, right?
Hmm.
You're a smart guy. Go to YouTube, figure it out, right? If you have any questions, ask me. I can help you out, right? So during the whole holiday, I was just learning about options, learning how it works. What is a call, what is a put, right? What is trading on margin? What does that mean? How much you have to pay, et cetera, right? The risks are involved because you're never going to want to get into something that you're not educated on, right? Take your time. The money's not going anywhere. The market's still going to be there. Make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into first, so you can make the right educated decision for yourself, right? And I got into options in January. I followed the same process that I followed before because the process was right. It's just that I was very emotionally invested. So I put myself out way too short. And my money went up 70%. So the losses that I accrued last year, I made that back and some in just a matter of 2 months, right? Um, and right now I'm still making it. It's been a tough week this past week because the whole market shifted and corrected itself, so everything just went down. But I'm still out in the game, right? Um, and this is the thing about the stock market that I know many people are trying to get themselves into, right? Um, do not follow the hype. Do not follow the hype. Don't just listen to Wall Street bets. Don't listen to the hype of a friend telling you buy Bitcoin, buy Dogecoin or Dogecoin, whatever you want to call it. Don't get into the hype of that. I mean, first of all, make sure that you budget yourself accordingly first. If you have high, if you have debt that has a high interest attached, like a credit card, pay that off first, right? Because what's happening there is that 20% interest rate on your credit card that you're trying to that you still have to pay it off. That's somebody else making money from you, right? If you make 5% out of the stock market, 10% out of the stock market, that's good and all, but you're still paying 20% on a credit card company, right? What's the wealth built in there if all your money you make you got to pay to somebody else, right? Pay that off. Pay high interest debt off first, right? Educate yourself on the market. Understand how it works. Understand how the Federal Reserve impacts the market. Understand how the interest works. Understand how the company you're investing makes money. Understand how the business is, right? And how news impacts the price of the stock because you're investing in long-term things, right? But as you do that, make decisions based on that process. If a friend tells you of a stock, don't just invest in it because it tells you buy it now or you're gonna lose out. Do your research. Take the L. Wait, I'll wait, but tell me why I should buy it. Give me the detail. Let me understand your thought process. This is why one of my friends said we had a group chat now in terms of stocks, right? Ram, he basically said I want to understand what you see when you invest in the stock, right? He said in the chat, and that's a great way to think about it, right? Don't just listen to somebody telling you buy this stock. Ask them, get familiar as to what their thought process is, right? Because you want to understand that thought process long term so you can make the right investments. If they're right, if they're wrong, if they can answer those questions, at least you know it's the hype, right? Um, but the goal with stocks is that it should be long term.
Right.
The don't There's going to be ups and downs or whatever the case may be. But if you look at, for instance, one of the worst recessions we had, which is known as a Great Recession right now, that when everything dropped in 2008, right? If you would have waited that out, yeah, you would have lost a lot of your money in 2008. But if you look at the graph, the market rebounded, and right now, right in 2020, even 2021, it's higher than at the peak what it was at the peak in 2008. If you would have waited out, you would still made money. You would have lost a lot of money short term, or long term, you would have made a significant amount. And Warren Buffett always says this, right? Just put your money in the S&P 500, right? Now, educate yourself where you put your money in, right? Don't put your money in one stock. Don't put your money in one industry. Diversify, right? Be smart. Um, but always think long term because the younger you are, if you're in your 20s, right? Um, you have time, and that time is accrued interest, right? If you're a little bit older, right? By all means, still consider it because that's your money working for you instead of you working for your money, right? It builds, right? It builds up. And that's also knowledge you can pass on to your kids and your grandkids. Because one thing that, does affect us as minorities is that there's traditionally speaking, those things that we need to know in order to build wealth, the tools are available in order to build wealth in a capitalist society, right? Are not taught in schools. We learn 1+1 = 2. We learn geometry, and trigonometry, and those aspects, but we never are taught taxes. We never are taught trust funds. We never thought about ETFs. We never thought how to navigate in terms of the real estate market or what impacts those prices, right? We never thought, oh, this is where you put your money on when you're younger, right? So it grows and you retire with more money than you will get in the 401k or more money than what you will get in Social Security, right? We're not taught that because that the mentality is, and this is truth, that financial literacy should be taught in the house, right? The situation is, as minorities, is that our parents don't know that. So how are they going to teach something that we don't know? What they saw is that that person in class who stayed in school, who did good in school, who went to college, who got a degree, did well in life. So I must teach that to my kids, right? What they don't see is that that same person who went to school, who got good grades, who went to college, this and this, that, learned how to manage the money, learned how to put the money in the right places, learn how to buy a house at a low interest rate, learn how to build that wealth, right? And those are things that they unfortunately are not passed through us. So we got to make sure that we educate ourselves in those financial tools and learn and become a little more financial literate so we can actually grow our wealth. Because what happens is, unfortunately, if you look at the different communities, right, throughout the U.S., when you look at them, the majority, a good portion of them are able to keep the wealth within the community. But when you look at the minorities, our wealth leaves like this outside of our community. Think about it. If somebody gives you $50,000 stimulus check, how many people in our community will actually spend that money in clothes, jewelry, movies, other things? Now think about where they put the money in there, right? Jordans, who gets the money? Nike, right? Is that keeping the wealth or is that leaving the wealth in the community, right? Same thing with food, right? Spend the money at McDonald's, spend the money at Burger King. Where that money is going to? That's not staying in the community. That's leaving the community, right?
Right.
So understanding the flow of money and knowing how to build from that in order to make sure that our later future generations are better kept, right? And then know the tools that are involved. Because honestly, capitalism is amazing. The one thing that I realize is that the problem is not the capitalist system itself, it's the lack of knowledge in terms of the tools that are available that are really help people down. Because it's a lot of things that it's a lack of education. And I'm not going to go into the DOE, but those things I strongly believe that it will take decades to be taught in schools. So we got to take our own effort to make sure that we take initiative and teach that to our own people, right? Um, yeah,
And
but
and I and I agree with that, Victor. I think coming full circle here, we definitely appreciate the nuggets that you have dropped, for people, and hopefully they can walk away with having a bit more information than they came in with, on this podcast. It's one of the things that I've been trying to help Sensei with,
Yeah, and
in
I
terms.
specifically like the part where you mentioned, I really appreciate at the end where you mentioned that it is our responsibility to make sure that our next generation is educated on these things, because you're absolutely right. In school they don't teach you this. financial health. They just teach you how to save money, basically, but they don't really teach you how to. And not even that. Like the financial class at other times might be just to how to budget your check, but they don't really help you how to create wealth.
Right.
That's usually taught in a household, and when you come from a household that don't have parents who don't know how to make money work for you, but just work for money, basically,
Mhm.
it becomes a little bit more difficult. So just the nugget that you dropped at the end of this of your journey, I think it can be it's very well appreciated and very valuable to the folks who are listening. I'm sorry, Master Roshi, I cut you off. Sorry about that.
No, no, no. That's great information. What I would add to that is I want to give you guys a great example that really relates to what Victor said in terms of generational wealth, right? Uh, so when I was at my daughter's music school, there was a mention by one of the other parents about Kumon, and Kumon is like this tutoring sort of service that I have my daughter in, and she has to do reading and math, like twice a week, and it's like these little packets that she does. So one of the parents said something along the lines of, "Yeah, she can't, she's not going to be able to access her trust until she finishes her Kumon." So Kumon goes all the way up until high school, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, like there's this other parent that's already got set up, and I spoke about this with my wife today, that one of the things with kids is you have to give them something to look forward to, right? A goal, right? So the goal with that kid is if you're able to finish this long sort of program, by the end of it, you will have access to capital, right? And
Mhm.
so that to me is a great example of how you can build generational wealth. And like you said, yes, they don't teach this stuff in school.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is reserved in special households, where that's a more frequent topic that's discussed, but we need to make that happen more and more often. And
Mhm.
with Sensei, like one of the things I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to help him. Like I think we're gonna have like a sit down session, Sensei, at some point to kind of go through buying stocks and things like that. Because at the end of the day, no matter how old you are or how young you are, you want to build a legacy for
Mhm.
your children or for your family. So when you depart this world, you just don't leave them with anything,
Yeah.
right? You're able to leave them with stocks or real estate, something tangible that they can use and help just be able to give them freedom, financial freedom to do whatever it is that they want to do and not be held back because they don't have the greatest credit score or they just don't have access to capital to buy a multifamily sort of property and things like that. And that basically takes us to the end here because that was really how we were going to sort of exit out of the
Hmm.
podcast is mentioning financial freedom.
Mhm.
And I think the nice thing is that we all are trying to make something happen. You, Sensei, you've got your roommate collect income from, and Victor, you're trying to get another property, but you're also investing in the stock market. I also invest in the stock market. As I mentioned before, I'm sitting right here in my second rental property, but that's not the end. Me and my wife want to keep building and growing for our children and their children's children, so that we have a nice sort of portfolio at the end of the day, and we can leave them something that they can leave, and keep giving.
I agree. I agree. And I just want to add one last thing, right? Just for the audiences out there, right? It's important not just to leave something for your kids, but also incentivize, just like Kumo, that little app, to show them how to build skills and learn how to keep up progressing and keep educating themselves, right? Because once you leave, it's not just about what's being left; it's making sure that they know how to manage things.
Right.
Um, and the important aspect is this to completely understand this aspect here. When you get acquire money and maintain it, that's not going to make anybody happy, right? I repeat, that's not the goal. Happiness is not the goal for money. Money is a means to an end, right? You cannot eat money, you cannot drink money. You got to use money to get water, to get food, to get clothes, whatever. It's a means, right? It's a middleman. to get what something else, right? And ends. And the one aspect that I just want to add right here is that money is gonna make you free, right? Not give you happiness, but give you freedom, financial freedom, more specifically, right? With financial freedom, you have time to do other aspects. You don't have to work. Hopefully, that's the goal, right? You can actually go. You have enough money not to work, but to travel, to take a day off, to do whatever you want, right? It gives you that time. It gives you that freedom because now the money is working for you as opposed to you working for your money, right? But at the end of the day, just keep in mind it's not going to buy you happiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to pursue on your own. That's each person has a different road to happiness. Each person has a different aspect of what they're trying to gain in life. But you cannot be fully happy in my perspective. This is my perspective. You cannot be fully happy without being free,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is a means, right? It's not the ultimate goal, but you got to be free in order to be truly happy, right? So I just want to end it up at that as well.
Thank you. And Sensei, do you have any parting words?
Uh, no, I just want to say again, thanks very much, Victor, for joining us. This was a wealth of information that you shared. And yeah, just thanks very much. This was a great show.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, Victor. You definitely brought up, like Sensei said, a wealth of information, and hopefully, that'll give a wealth to our audience as well. So we appreciate your time, Victor. Thank you for being on the show, and we hope we can make the audience a little richer next time.
Definitely, definitely.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me. All right.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, everyone.